When two police officers detained her, they couldn't have imagined they'd meet her again, this time not on the street, but in the courtroom, where she would preside as the judge determining their future. It was a bright, clear afternoon in Fort Collins, Colorado. The park buzzed with life. Kids laughing on the playground, runners pacing along the trail, and families enjoying picnics beneath the wide shade of old oak trees. In the middle of this vibrant but peaceful setting, a black woman sat alone on a bench by the pond, a hefty hardcover book resting on her lap. Her name was Camille, an esteemed attorney, stealing a rare break from her packed schedule. She was lost in her reading when the loud screech of brakes jolted her from her thoughts. A police vehicle rolled to a stop at the edge of the park, drawing curious glances from several bystanders. Two officers stepped out, their faces serious, exuding authority. Their gaze fixed directly on Camille, the only solitary figure in the area. "Ma'am, may we have a word with you?" one officer asked, his tone more accusatory than concerned. Camille looked up, calm and composed. "Of course," she said, gently closing her book. The second officer moved a step closer, his voice sharp. "We received a report about suspicious activity in this area. Can you explain what you're doing here?" Camille arched a brow, visibly confused. "Suspicious?" "I'm just sitting here, reading." She lifted the book slightly to support her statement, but their suspicion didn't waver. "Can we see some identification?" the first officer demanded. Her heartbeat quickened, but she remained poised. "I'm not sure I understand." "What's this about?" "It's standard procedure," the second officer replied, though his tone hinted otherwise. A small crowd had begun to gather. Some watched with curiosity, others traded uneasy glances. Sensing the discomfort, Camille let out a soft sigh and reached into her bag for her wallet, handing over her ID. "Camille Johnson," the officer read, almost mockingly. "What's your purpose here, Miss Johnson?" Camille took a deep breath, keeping her voice even. "I live in this city. I'm here to enjoy the park. Is that not allowed?" The officer's expression tightened. "We'll see." He returned her ID but didn't back off. They kept questioning her, the tone now clearly interrogative. "You always carry a book like that with you?" one officer sneered. "Are you waiting for someone or here alone?" the other asked, resting a hand conspicuously on his belt. Camille had faced countless tense moments in court, but this was different. The imbalance of power, the undertone in their voices, she recognized it instantly. Yet she remained controlled. "I won't be answering more questions unless you tell me what you suspect me of," she stated, her tone firm. That seemed to provoke them. The first officer stepped closer. "Don't get clever with us," he snapped. "We're just doing our job." "I know the law," Camille answered, "and I'm not violating it by sitting in a public park." But they weren't interested in logic. The officer grabbed her arm. "You're resisting," he said, though she hadn't moved. "What are you doing?" she cried, startled. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. One man raised his phone to record. "Stop resisting," the officer barked again, louder now, almost theatrically. Camille's heart pounded as the cold metal cuffs closed around her wrists. She tried to remain calm, though shame and fury swelled inside her. They escorted her to the cruiser, ignoring the crowd's questions. As she was led away, Camille caught the eye of a young woman holding up her phone. A silent, powerful moment passed between them, a plea to record, to remember. But Camille knew the ride in the back of the cruiser was not where her story ended. It was where it truly began. Sitting in the tight back seat, Camille's mind raced. Years spent defending clients, advocating for justice, navigating legal loopholes, and now, here she was, on the receiving end of that same flawed system. The irony was sharp, but there was no amusement in it, only rage. The station was worse. The intake process was cold, degrading, designed to erode dignity. She was fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in a holding cell under buzzing fluorescent lights. "Enjoy your stay," one officer said with smug satisfaction as he shut the door. On the hard bench, Camille clasped her hands, replaying the park scene again and again. How did a quiet afternoon become this? The answer stung. Bias. Hours passed. Eventually, a young officer came to her cell with a clipboard. "Miss Johnson, you've been charged with resisting arrest and obstructing a peace officer," he said without emotion. On what grounds? Camille demanded, sharper than she meant. You can address that in court, he said, turning away. She exhaled, slow and deliberate. The charges were weak, she knew that. But this wasn't going to be a simple fight. It never was. Later, released on bail, Camille stepped into the cool night air. It hit her like a wave. Marissa, her close friend and colleague, was waiting by the curb. Camille. Marissa rushed over, eyes full of worry and relief. Are you all right? Camille nodded, though her body trembled faintly. I'm okay, she said, though the word felt empty. Driving home, silence stretched between them until Camille finally spoke. I'm not letting this go, Marissa. Not this time. Marissa's grip on the wheel tightened. What are you going to do? I'm tired of this, Camille said, and I have everything I need to fight back, so I will. That night she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by open legal texts and notepads, outlining a civil rights lawsuit. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from fierce resolve. In the days that followed, the community rallied. The video taken in the park had gone viral. Messages of support flooded in, emails, calls, stories of similar experiences. Camille's determination deepened with each one. She wasn't only standing up for herself now. She was standing for all who had been silenced, mistreated, ignored. But even with all her preparation, she couldn't foresee the twist that justice would soon take. Calm but resolute, Camille's demeanor as she was taken away by police became a powerful image of strength in the face of wrongdoing. Journalists began to reach out, requesting interviews, but Camille declined them all. She wasn't interested in the spotlight. Her attention was firmly fixed on building a case, not only to hold the officers accountable, but to uncover the deeper systemic issues that allowed such abuses to continue unchecked. Yet at night, when the noise of the world died down, the emotional burden crept in. She couldn't stop replaying the moment of her arrest. The condescending voices, the cold steel of the handcuffs, the murmurs from the crowd. The thought of how easy it all could have escalated left her unsettled, but it also sharpened her resolve. One evening, as she sifted through case files and legal documents, Marissa stopped by with some food. Camille barely looked up as Marissa set the takeout on the table. You've been at this for hours, Marissa said softly. I don't have the luxury of stopping, Camille responded without missing a beat. Marissa sat across from her, studying her expression. You know this is about more than just winning a case, right? People are counting on you. Camille finally closed her laptop and met her friend's eyes. I know, she said steadily. Which is exactly why I can't lose. Her preparation was exhaustive. She reviewed comparable cases, gathered key evidence, and assembled a team of trusted legal professionals who shared her mission for justice. Camille made it a priority to connect with the community. She showed up to local forums, listened to stories from others who had faced similar injustices, and spoke at a nearby college about the importance of holding institutions accountable. One afternoon, as she walked to her car after a meeting, a stranger cautiously approached. Miss Johnson? The woman asked. Yes? I just wanted to thank you, the woman said, her voice trembling, for standing up for all of us. Camille felt a lump rise in her throat. She gave a soft smile. I'm just doing what I can. The public support was both empowering and daunting. It motivated her, but it also raised the stakes. She couldn't afford to falter. Then, one day, her attorney called with an update. The officer she was suing had filed a motion to have the case thrown out. Camille had expected this. It was a standard delay tactic. But as her attorney outlined the legal next steps, he paused. Camille, he said carefully, there's something else. You've been assigned to preside over one of their upcoming cases next month. She froze. The irony was overwhelming. For weeks, she'd been preparing to take legal action against these very officers, and now she was being asked to rule on a separate case involving them. Camille leaned back in her chair, stunned. She wondered if she could remain impartial, if she could sit in judgment without letting her experience color her decisions. Then she thought about what they put her through, and the people relying on her to rise above. This wasn't just coincidence. It was a chance to demonstrate what real justice looked like. The courtroom buzzed with soft conversation as people settled into their seats. The case itself wasn't headline-grabbing, an internal review regarding excessive force used by the officers, unrelated to Camille's own incident. For most, it was just another procedural matter. Officers Carter and Daniels sat at the defense table, still in uniform, speaking quietly to one another. Their faces were calm, perhaps even dismissive. Just another case, just another hurdle. Then the door to the judge's chamber opened. Camille stepped out, black robe flowing, her movements purposeful. She took her seat on the bench, composed and authoritative. Her eyes briefly met the officers. The effect was immediate. Officer Carter's face paled, his eyes widening. Daniel shifted uneasily, his jaw clenched tight. It was her, the woman they had detained in the park. Camille paused, letting the weight of the moment hang in the air, then said clearly, "This court is now in session. Please be seated." The officers sat rigidly, clearly rattled. Carter whispered to their attorney, who nodded but kept his gaze on Camille. For the first time in weeks, she had the upper hand, but she knew this wasn't about personal vengeance. Her role required fairness, and she was committed to that principle. Still, everyone in the room could feel the tension and the twist of fate. As opening statements were delivered, Camille stayed professional, listening closely and taking notes. Yet every so often, her gaze would flick toward the defendants. She noticed a tightness in their posture, the nervous movements of their hands. During a break, the two officers paced in the hallway, their voices hushed but intense. "How is she to judge?" Carter hissed, clearly unnerved. "This has to be some kind of setup," Daniels muttered. "It's not a setup," their lawyer interrupted. "It's a coincidence. You need to stay focused. She's not your problem, your actions are." But the officers barely heard him. They were too caught up in their disbelief. When court resumed, Camille remained steady, ensuring the proceedings were balanced and efficient. Still, her very presence was enough to shake the defense. Every time she addressed them, they shifted in their seats, visibly uncomfortable. At one point, during witness testimony, she caught Carter sneaking a glance at her. His expression wasn't defiant, it was regretful, as if the reality of their actions was finally beginning to sink in. By the end of the day, the atmosphere was heavy. Camille brought down her gavel. "We'll reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m., she announced. As people filed out, she stayed at the bench organizing her materials. She could feel the officers' stares lingering. They hesitated, as though considering whether to speak, but in the end they left in silence, burdened by the knowledge that their reckoning had only just begun. For Camille, the true test wasn't in the symbolism of the moment. It was in the decisions that lay ahead, and whether justice could truly be served. The courtroom was full the next morning. News of the case's strange twist had spread, drawing more spectators than usual for a misconduct hearing. Some were curious, others there to silently support Camille, even though they knew she had to remain neutral. She entered with the same grace and determination, her robe trailing behind her as she took her place on the bench. The lawyers resumed their arguments without delay. The prosecutor laid out the case with precision, walking the court through the incident and calling witnesses who described the excessive force used by the officers. "Your Honor," the prosecutor concluded, "this wasn't simply a mistaken judgment. Their actions were a clear misuse of authority, a reflection of a recurring disregard for the very people they were meant to protect." Camille listened attentively, her pen moving smoothly across her notepad, her focus unwavering even as the officers squirmed under her steady gaze. The defense attorney stood to respond, his tone composed but showing signs of strain. "Your Honor, while we do not dispute the events in question, we maintain that the situation escalated due to factors beyond the officers' immediate control. Their intentions were not malicious, and we believe this matter does not merit punitive consequences." As the courtroom debate unfolded, Camille couldn't help but notice the similarities to her own encounter, the excuses, the rationalizations. It was all too familiar. Yet she remained objective, determined to let the facts, not emotion, guide her judgment. When witness cross-examinations began, the atmosphere grew heavier. The prosecution brought forth the victim, a young man named Ethan. His voice trembled as he described being thrown to the ground during what should have been a routine traffic stop. "They didn't give me a chance to say anything," Ethan said, his eyes flitting nervously between the legal teams and the officers. "It felt like they decided I was guilty the second they saw me." The prosecutor followed up. "Did you resist at any point?" "No," Ethan answered firmly. I was afraid, but I complied with everything they asked. It didn't matter. They'd already made up their minds. The room was quiet as the defense began cross-examining. They tried to challenge his account, but Ethan stood firm. Camille watched closely, her expression neutral. Then came the moment everyone had anticipated. The officers were called to the stand. Officer Carter testified first. He shot a quick, uneasy glance at Camille as he took the oath. His voice wavered as he responded to the prosecutor's questions. Officer Carter, the prosecutor said, "You're accused of using excessive force. Can you explain what led to your actions?" Carter hesitated, glancing toward his partner before responding. "I thought the situation was getting out of hand. I made a judgment call." "Do you believe that decision was justified?" the prosecutor asked. "At the time, yes," Carter said, shifting uncomfortably. "But looking back, I probably should have handled it differently." "How so?" the prosecutor pressed. "By not slamming an unarmed and cooperative individual to the ground?" Carter opened his mouth but said nothing. His silence was more powerful than any answer. When Officer Daniels testified, his tone was similarly strained. His efforts to defend his actions only further strengthened the prosecution's case, highlighting his refusal to accept responsibility. Camille listened with quiet intensity. On the outside, she was unreadable, but inside she felt a wave of disappointment and sorrow. These men had been entrusted with power and had misused it carelessly, leaving harm in their wake. As the hearing continued, it became increasingly clear that the evidence was overwhelmingly against the officers. The prosecutor's closing statement was compelling, urging the court to send a message that abuse of authority would not go unchallenged. The defense's final remarks lacked strength. Their argument seemed thin and unconvincing. Even Carter and Daniels appeared resigned to what was coming. Camille brought the session to a close with a composed tone, announcing that a decision would be issued the following week. As the courtroom emptied, the officers lingered by the door, their expressions pale and drawn. For the first time, they seemed to truly grasp the weight of what they'd done and the consequences that lay ahead. But true justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about responsibility, change, and making sure history didn't repeat itself. A week later, the courtroom was packed. The silence was heavy as Camille entered to deliver her verdict. Every seat was filled, the tension thick. Reporters lined the back of the room, notebooks ready. This case had grown beyond two individuals. It now represented a broader fight for justice and institutional reform. Camille spoke with calm authority. Law enforcement's duty is to protect and serve with honesty, dignity, and fairness. When those given this responsibility betray that trust, the damage goes far beyond a single victim. It weakens the foundation of community trust. She paused, scanning the room. Carter and Daniels sat at the defense table, their heads lowered. The evidence has shown that officers Carter and Daniels used unnecessary force, neglecting the protocols they swore to uphold. Their behavior was not only unwarranted, but reveals a troubling pattern that must be addressed. Camille then outlined their penalties: suspension without pay, enrollment in comprehensive retraining, and a formal disciplinary record that would remain with them. It was a firm but balanced judgment, one that held them responsible while allowing a chance for rehabilitation. She struck the gavel with finality. Court is adjourned. The officers stood, their faces solemn. As they turned to leave, Carter paused and looked back. "Your Honor," he said softly, "I'm sorry." It wasn't enough to undo the damage, but it was a beginning. Camille gave a slight nod. She accepted the words, but withheld forgiveness. Real change, she knew, would come through deeds, not apologies. After the courtroom cleared, Camille sat in silence for a moment, reflecting. Justice had been served, but it didn't feel like victory. For every case like this, she knew there were many that remained unheard, unresolved. That evening, she attended a community forum at the local rec center. The room was filled with people, sharing experiences, concerns, hopes. As Camille listened, her sense of mission deepened. An older woman approached afterward, gripping Camille's hand tightly. "Thank you," she said, her voice emotional. "What you did in there, it matters to all of us." Camille smiled gently. "This is only the beginning. We still have a lot of work ahead. In the days that followed, Camille helped foster important conversations among civic leaders, law enforcement, and activists. She used her role to push for meaningful reform, calling for transparency, accountability, and equity in policing. The case had ignited something, a wave of awareness and demand for change that extended beyond Fort Collins. Across the state, communities rallied for policies rooted in justice and fairness. For Camille, the journey wasn't about personal vindication. It was about making sure others wouldn't have to endure the same injustice she had. The pursuit of justice was far from over. But moments like this proved that change, while slow, was possible. One afternoon, as she stood on the courthouse steps watching a group of young activists gather for a peaceful protest, she felt a renewed hope. The system wasn't flawless, but with enough courage, enough voices, it could be pushed towards something better. And that, she thought, is the kind of justice worth fighting for. If you believe in the power of justice and accountability, subscribe to our channel for more stories that spark change and inspire reflection. Together we can create a fairer, more just world.